Sultan is with us. Dr. Sanya talked about COVID-19 and the sort of profound impact it had on poverty. And again, I'd like to reiterate, I have lots of questions on that, and I'm sure the audience does too. But let's move on to the pandemic response, Dr. Faisal Sultan, because it has gotten global appreciation of smart lockdown policy. At the same time, we also know that this is not going away soon. We are now in the middle of the third wave and dealing with that as well. So if you could talk about the pandemic response and where you think this model, this particular model that Pakistan has developed in terms of coordination and dealing with response, how it could be replicated or at least emulated worldwide.
Thank you very much. So what I'm going to say, it will have some echoes of what's been said already. But picking up from there and with a specific focus on the pandemic response itself. Right at the beginning, I think we are in the happy position today of talking about security beyond a conventional or a territorial security perspective, and talking about it in the backdrop of COVID-19 actually provides us some advantages. And first and foremost of which is the fact that I don't think there's anybody alive today who's not been living under a rock who does not realize the fundamental and central importance of general human development, well-being, safety, security, and of course, especially in the context of health and well-being. Now, in Pakistan's case, one of the most important things and one of the most central tenets of our response was inclusivity and a focus and target towards protection of those that need it most. There was a tendency or a temptation, I should say, of rushing to somewhat narrower ideas of how to control the pandemic. But I think the tone was set by the government, by the Prime Minister himself, in which front center stage was the average Pakistani citizen. And so this nuanced approach, which really then got various names from all the way from smart lockdowns to this and that, essentially was that while we battle the pandemic, while we strive to protect people, let us not just protect them from the pandemic, but also make sure that what was coming as a consequence of our corrective actions or our restrictions did not indeed wipe out some of the gains that you were going to make from the pandemic control. And these included not just in the economic domain or in monetary terms, but well into how it impacted public health, access to health, prevention, our programs, and so forth. So this was the total backdrop. Now, specific actions within it were very crucial. We all talked about a whole of the government response, about everybody coming together, coherence, coordination, the NCOC, all that is good. But I think it was targeted not just for coherence of action, but for actions that actually had impacts that transcended social boundaries, social barriers, geography, and style of living, etc. So this coherence was first and foremost. The second bit, I think, that defined our response for the pandemic was the fact that for once our decisions at a government level were driven by direct statistical facts, by epidemic responses. So all around the globe we saw that there was at times in advanced developed countries, we saw some incoherence and some disagreements and difficulties, but at least in Pakistan, we were able to cobble together a coherent response that was data-driven, based on information, based on scientific information, which was not just nuanced, but also flexible and responsive. So I think that was the second bit that was crucially important. The third part was the ability to not just coordinate detection or disease or analysis and throwing out recommendations, but the ability to actually reach out to provincial entities despite an 18th Amendment scenario, to be able to have a coherent preparation for the pandemic and what was to come and so forth. And the next bit was even more important, which was to enable longevity to this process. It is quite okay to be able to build a response or to cobble together a response in real time, but to be able to ensure that it actually sustains not only during the present cycles and waves of the pandemic, but to be able to be prepared for future threats and future risks that come along. So in line with that, the government's healthcare reform agenda is solidly along the lines of what is the usual playbook for this. So first and foremost, the access to care. And one of the things that, and so looking beyond a little bit the epidemic part of it, but to actually general health in perspective. So what destroys a lot of households and trips them over into poverty, into becoming recipients for SRs and such initiatives, very often is catastrophic health expenses. And so this whole Sehat card idea, nothing new, but the implementation, and it's across the board implementation, and as it's growing, is crucial as one of the pillars. So access to care. There are other bits to it, but we perhaps, if there is interest, we'll talk about it. The second important bit out of all this has been to ensure that the HR, the manpower that is created and generated to take care of those that require help and health is of sufficient numbers and of sufficient quality. So therefore, the reform of the regulating entities within Pakistan, the Pakistan Medical Commission, the Pakistan Nursing Council, and other such regulators is not only on the cards, is already partially underway. The next bit is crucial and important, both in the pandemic perspective as well as long term, is our ability to generate, regulate, create, innovate medical devices and medications and vaccines. So I think the reform of the current regulatory environment for the Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan and similar is on the cards, and you will see more of it soon. And while this is not an exhaustive list, but I do feel that of the delivery of healthcare is one more aspect and tenet that we need to keep focus on, and that is governance and institutional reform. Many of our institutions, whether large or small, whether serving the primary care network or large tertiary hospitals, despite receiving funds, are often poorly managed, and I think a reform of how these are governed has been crucial. So the next pillar in the reform agenda has been of reforming not only the major teaching institutions, you've got the MTI Act, both within the federal territories and others, but also of the primary and secondary healthcare networks. So this is also a work that is in partial process. So we hope that what's been highlighted to us because of the pandemic is not just restricted to the pandemic itself. There is a pandemic response, but it needs to build some sustainability so that we have a healthcare system that truly takes care of the weakest parts of society. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sultan. That was very comprehensive. And there are a couple of points I'd like to come back to you on as well. And I think they're interlinked. So for instance, if we talk about access to healthcare, universal healthcare, or universal basic income, those are tied together. But I'm going to move on to Mr. Aslam now, and because this is also linked. Food security is linked to climate change, disasters that keep on happening, disrupt systems and displace people and impact the most marginalized, and that's also linked as well. We know that climate change is an existential challenge, not just in Pakistan, which is a very country that's extremely vulnerable, but around the world as well. Could you talk about your initiatives? We know that the Free Foundation program on a massive scale has also gotten recognition globally. But what else? What is beyond that?
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank National Security Division for having this workshop, and also for including this issue of climate change within the ambit of human security. I mean, I personally believe that in the 21st century, we cannot think of human security without climate security. This is probably on top of the list of most countries now in terms of protecting their humanity. In Pakistan, we are feeling it and we are living through that paradigm much more than other countries. We are a country which is not a big contributor to this problem. We are created, I think we are 135th even today on the list of countries who are contributing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We are less than 1% in terms of the quantum of greenhouse gases put in the air. But we are number 8 on the list of countries most vulnerable to climate change. We have been facing impacts for the last decade and a half. And this year there was a special categorization done of only 3 countries in the world, which have been constantly on the top 10 list of most vulnerable countries. And Pakistan happens to be one of those 3 countries. So this is a problem which is not of our making, but which we will have to deal with and which our next generations will have to deal with. And I'll just take a minute to tell you why that issue is there. It has to do with our topography and our geography. Topographically, Pakistan is a country which has got the second highest point in the world, K2, and then we go down within 2,000 kilometers to the sea level. So within those 2,000 kilometers, we've got 12 ecological zones, which is a gift of God, because no other country in the world has those 12 ecological zones. But geographically, the problem is that on top of that longitudinal line, we've got the third pole of the world sitting. The water towers of the world are there in the north of Pakistan, and the 3 main mountain ranges have got the glaciers which feed us, but which are also now set because of climate change. And what happens is that if you have too much water flowing to Pakistan, it's a longitudinal country, there's one big artery of Indus, that is a problem. And if you have too little water flowing to Pakistan, that becomes a problem because of drought. So this topography and geography is not going to change in Pakistan. So climate change is an issue of our national security which is here to stay. It has got dimensions much wider than the environment. It has got economic dimensions because when we deal with the issues of climate change, there is a price to pay for that. And the price tag that has been estimated is about 3 to 4% of our GDP gets shared away when Pakistan faces these impacts. It is an issue of water security because all of it has to do with the glacier in the north and the monsoons which are also shifting because of climate change, and all of that comes down as water in Pakistan. It's almost 90% of the water that we have is seriously impacted with climate change. It also has to do with food security because that water feeds the agriculture. The agriculture in the farm depends on the weather patterns to sow a seed, to reap a crop, and those weather patterns as they change, the food security gets directly impacted. It also has to do with national security because we share our water basins and we share this huge water tower, ice tower in the north with our neighbors, and we don't have any friendly relationships with them. And there is no regional cooperation mechanism which is really a requirement for Pakistan, but at the moment it does not exist. So I think this is the paradigm that we are living in Pakistan, and if you talk about what our response is, what we are doing about it, I think our primary response has to be on the adaptation front. How do we adapt to these changes, because these changes are happening and Pakistan has to be ready to adapt to them. So we have to set up early warning systems so that we know about these changes as early as we possibly can, as early as we scientifically can. That we are doing that, we're setting up a lot of monitoring stations on our glaciers which are melting so that we know very soon what is happening in the north, because whatever happens in the north very soon travels down to the south. Pakistan is doing that way. So we are setting up those monitoring stations so that we can set up early warning systems. We are also setting up these weather stations in Balochistan, which is a drought-ridden province of Pakistan. And they need to know also beforehand when the rains are coming, how much the rains are coming. So as much as scientifically it is possible, Pakistan is on that pathway, we've got the funds, and that's being implemented. But we also need to climate-proof our infrastructure. The infrastructure that we build today in the 21st century is not what we could have built in the 20th century, because it faces all these impacts, and these impacts are not going anywhere. So this climate-proofing of infrastructure is important. When climate change hits any country, 90% of the impacts are because of the wrong infrastructure being in the wrong place, built in the wrong way. And so we are cognizant of that, and our planning process has been tweaked to add a climate risk box in it, so that any infrastructure project in Pakistan has to look at climate change risks and then make that design. But what we're also doing when we talk about the plantation campaign, that's a nature-based solution to deal with climate change. It doesn't sound very complicated, but there have been studies done by Oxford University, by Harvard University, who have studied all the responses to climate change and what should we do about it. And the easiest, most effective, cheapest response is to plant a tree. It's a God-given gift to the world. It's a machine which, when you plant it, it starts bringing down the carbon dioxide, starts putting in oxygen. It regulates the local climate in areas where it is direly required, and it also stores the water and then gives it, the rainwater, and then gives it down to the ground. So it's a machine that every climate impacted country needs. In Pakistan, luckily, with the vision that we have, the Prime Minister even in KP, we started the Billion Tree project, which was a big success. We targeted 350,000 hectares of forests to be restored. We actually did 600,000. We did it below budget, overachieved on our own vision, and got globally recognized for that. And now we've got a 10 billion tree project underway. It's got 7 plants which deal with all sorts of forests, from the northern forest, alpine forest, to the scrub forest in the mainland Pakistan, to the mangroves in the south. And it's got a human dimension to it. All of this nature-based solution is based on encouraging communities to come in, giving these jobs to the people. So even in this pandemic, when we got hit by the pandemic, we announced what was called the green stimulus. And the idea of the green stimulus was that we needed to protect nature, but at the same time generate green jobs. So about 85,000 green jobs got generated in a COVID-safe environment for young people by this project during the COVID era. At the same time, we also started a protected area initiative. I talked about the 12 ecological zones. Pakistan is a very unique country. And these, we've got sites in Pakistan that are not present anywhere else in the world. And these need to be protected for our future generation. So we are doing that through this protected area initiative. We are expanding our protected areas exponentially, I would say, because we had 30 national parks just 8 months back. Today we have 45, covering a huge expanse of area. All of these national parks will also get jobs, because we will employ park rangers and young people to go out and protect nature and be part of this protected area initiative. It's also something as a tool, a nature-based tool to counter climate change. I'll just take a minute to talk about the energy side also, because that's the other part of climate change. That we talk about nature, we invest in nature, and that helps you fight climate change. But we also, on the energy side, we need to be on the right side of history. And Pakistan has decided that we are not part of the problem, and we don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution to climate change. So on the energy side, we've taken some very big decisions. One of which is that we are moving towards clean energy. We've set a target of 60% of our mix to be clean energy, which is hydro. And we're lucky to have hydro, wind, and solar present in Pakistan. So we've set a target, and now we're moving in that direction. We're trying to get off the coal bandwagon. Previous governments put us on the imported coal bandwagon. So we were importing coal, setting up these projects in Pakistan. So we have decided not to do it anymore. So the Prime Minister made a very bold statement to immediately stop it. And we are not just talking, we are also walking that talk. We shared 2,600 megawatts of a signed imported coal project and added 3,700 megawatts of hydropower. We are also talking about electric vehicle transition. That's the way the world is going. That hurts us more because transport is 40% of our emissions. It's also back to climate change, but it's worse off for air pollution in Pakistan. So we need to get rid of that problem, and one of the ways to do it is to go electric. So we've set up a policy and 30% transition towards that solution. So I would just like to say that climate change is a problem which is not going to go away in Pakistan. It is here to stay because of the way we are. But we are in a position to confront the issue and try to adapt to the new world which has got climate change in it. And Pakistan is doing that, and it will remain in the middle of the equation as far as human security is concerned. And I'm
Thank you so much. Again, we've looked at it from the energy, food security, water, all of those perspectives. But I think ultimately, and that's the whole idea behind the food security paradigm as well, where it goes back to personal security as well. And we have Mr. Rani with us, we're very fortunate. And we know that visible success in terms of counter-terrorism, that's measured, that's acknowledged again, time and time again, all over the world. The next step obviously is counter-extremism. How do we measure the success in that area?
Terrorism is a threat to the Constitution, and countering terrorism is protecting the Constitution. Thank you very much. I am indebted to the organizers to invite me to this better late than never conference, and giving me this honor to speak, and more importantly to learn from the distinguished
سیکیورٹی ڈائلاگ سے معاونین خصوصی ثانیہ نشتر ملک امین اسلم اور فیصل سلطان خطاب کر رہے تھے، جس میں ان کا کہنا تھا کہ احساس پروگرام کا دائرہ کار بڑھا رہے ہیں، کورونا وبا سے بہتر انداز میں نبرد آزما ہوئے، کورونا کے تناظر میں اداروں سے مربوط